Okay.
Then as is being given as a gift to the son of a plantation owner. And the son, who's a boy himself, says, well, thanks, but what am I going to do with him? And the old man pulls his son aside and explains to him that owning this baby, along with a 10-acre plot of land that he had given him the year before, would make him a man of property. And I'll quote the old man here. He says, "A man without property is hardly better than a nigger. Truth be told," which you should never say in front of them, "is that the only thing that separates white trash from niggers is the color of their skin. And what separates us from the white trash is that we are gentlemen, men of property." And thinking about that in the context of the question that's been posed today, I find myself unavoidably making comparisons between an attitude that was prevalent in the mid-19th century and one that is held by a significant minority in the country here in the early 21st century, even if the current iteration twists itself into knots often to avoid saying it out loud. And the lesson that I take from that is that Black people have always found a way to survive and even thrive in adversity. My great-great-grandfather survived by taking every advantage that he could from what he found in the condition that he was in, enslaved on a Southern Alabama plantation. My great-grandfather survived and prospered through Reconstruction and Jim Crow. So did my grandparents and my parents. And I find myself thinking often of friends of mine and some relatives who are seriously considering leaving the country at this point because they feel like it's just too inhospitable, too dangerous. And while I understand the position that they've taken, having worked on this book and having explored all of the ramifications of what it has taken for a people to survive, the decision that I came to is that I can't follow them. There's too much invested in here. And also, the lesson that we take from our ancestors is that they could make it, well, so can I. And so if anything has changed for me as a result of doing that work, it is a confirmation, a reaffirmation of the investment that my family and families like it have in this country. And I don't think we should give that up easily.
Mm-hmm. I hear that. Okay. Thanks, Charles. That was appreciated. All right. I see Lonnae O'Neill, who's see that? Mid country. Unearthing my family's secrets of man, legacy, and planet. What's the date? What's the publication date, Lonnae? And what did you learn from doing this book that affected your life?
Here, Richard, thank you. And first, that was Sally. Let me give you the hard copy. And it will be out June 17, a couple of weeks. So we're getting there. I'm gonna say I believe in ghosts, right? Ghosts. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I started to do a chapter that had breadcrumbs in it, just because thing after thing after thing happened, so much so that I wrote about it, and I said, okay, this is a knobby knee to the back, like you're on the right track, keep going. I just felt like I kept getting these signs. So I traced 7 generations of family history against the sweep of American history, right? And so I'm back to the 1780s when I start. And by doing it that way, and it's family history, so it's very personal. By doing it that way, I came to understand very, very deeply something which had been more abstract before, which is a lot of what gets encoded as messy or tacky or ghetto or violent or N-word BS, right, is trauma.
Trauma.
It is trauma, and it is rippling through the generations. And going back to this history, the U.S. slave schedules, which is the actual proper name, United States slave schedules of a census report, right? You're in the filigree, you're in the parchment paper, you're in the scrolls, in the advertisements. For my journalism, it started as a story. I got an invitation to a reunion between the descendants of the enslavers and the descendants of the enslaved on Facebook. And my first reaction was deuces. I missed me on those plantation happenings, right? But I went and I was convinced by my editor to go in as a journalist, and my notebook, right, gave me a barrier, and I could get into it with my own authority. I always have known as a veteran journalist to look at B matter, but the book has made me voracious about origin stories and indexing questions, right? Things in relationship to other things. My grandmother was Susie Bibb, and it never even occurred to me when I heard of Bibb lettuce to connect the two in any way, shape, or form, right? And these were actually her people, right? The line of people she is descended from. So it takes me, as I said, into the ephemera. Something else with the journalism, it is very different calling up academic research organizations, subject matter experts, historical societies as a journalist for the Washington Post, for ESPN, Anscape, any of that, than it is as an author and a researcher, right? Because you're almost racing a clock. You put in the question and you hope you get a response, in between the time it takes for them to Google you, to read through, and to kind of say, oh, where is she coming from with this, right? As Lee was talking about, this understanding of America is, it puts the question in play, right? And they know very clearly that that's what you're going to do. The net effect through all of this, through this hundreds of years of looking at history, my family's history, so I could name it. Once you can name something, they said in the Descendants documentary, you can tell it what to do, right? I could claim a woman that they called Old Keziah, but I said and she's my fourth grade grandmother, but that naming convention is one that works for traffickers, right? So I called her Mama Keziah, right? And that opened up the story for me because it changed, right? No longer my POV has shifted in the story. And so it's giving me, it challenges me to go deeper into origin stories, but gives to me more authority in rejecting other people's framing. And that is the main thing, and not caring or spending a lot of time on whether they get it or not.
Okay, thank you. Bobbi Bowman is also here, and her book is not out yet, but she's done an awful lot of research and has a remarkable story to tell. So Bobbi, you're on.
Thank you. Good evening. It's so good to see everybody here. I'm going to answer Dick's question by talking about two things. First, how my skills as a journalist led me to my family, and secondly, the difference it has made in my life. I discovered my family story because as a young reporter at the Washington Post, my editors always told me, whenever you go to a courthouse, go fishing. Courthouses are secret keepers, and you never know what you're going to find. So in the spring of 2010, I was standing in the document room of the Campbell County Courthouse in Rustburg, Virginia. I was looking for a deed to land my sister and I had inherited from our parents. I quickly found the deed, and I didn't want to spend 4 hours driving back home right then. So I went fishing. I decided to search for deeds under Mama's maiden name, which is Williamson. Suddenly, I saw the name of Maria Williamson, my great-great-grandmother. Why is Grandma Maria's name in a deed book? I said out loud. Our family has never owned any land. Mama told me that our ancestors walked out of slavery with just the clothes on their backs, and they became sharecroppers. But I had now found an 1871 deed that stated that Thomas Rosser, who I knew was a slave owner, had sold to Maria Williamson 100 acres of land. And this was the same land that William Williamson, in his lifetime, had sold to Thomas Rosser. It was like, what? My family owned 100 acres of land before the Civil War. I had uncovered facts that nobody in my family knew, not even my mother. I had uncovered the name of a great-great-grandfather whose name had been totally lost to us for 2 generations. A great-great-grandfather who was a free man before the Civil War. A great-great-grandfather who owned a great deal of land, and a great-great-grandfather who had sold his land to a white family who had then returned it to our Black family. I had never heard a story like this, much less in my own family. And that's when I knew that, frankly, that the ancestors had finally come for me. I am a Black woman. I love history, but I never wanted to know about my family in slavery. First of all, it hurt too much, and I thought of them as victims of an inhumane system. And now the ancestors had confronted me with literally the best story of my life. What difference has this made in my life? I now know I am the descendants of warriors.
All right, you're here. Okay, thank you, Bobbi. I wonder whether Barbara Cochran is ready, because we can insert their presentation now.
Hey, Richard, she's not on yet. She had a family emergency, so she's in the process of signing on now. So she's on in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, very good. All right, in the meantime, we'll just take questions from the rest of the people on the call. Or actually, we have some other people here who have also traced their family history. So I'll call on them. One of whom is Ken Cooper, who I was the first to sign in. I'm trying to find you here, Ken.
And so am I.
Oh, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Well, tell us about, you're going to talk about your Cherokee past as well as other things. So tell us about what you've been up to, briefly, of course, and how all this has affected your life and your outlook.
Thank you, Richard. Let me first by thanking both Lee and Charles, whose books I have read in the past week. In fact, Charles, I finished yours just yesterday.
All right.
And Lee, in particular, I want to thank you for an insight you have about the connection between corporal punishment and slavery. I mean, I thought that was very insightful. And I also want to say I'm sorry for what you had to go through as a child. And I say that as someone who was familiar with the extension cord, as you call it.
Yeah.
In our house, it was called the ironing cord because that was usually where it was used. And Charles, like you, I started out thinking I'd write a book of nonfiction, and at my editor's suggestion, which I think Lee and I share, who I think we share, I switched to historical fiction, and for exactly the same reasons you did. So many gaps in the record, and some things you're never going to find recorded. Like the most common one in my book is how married ancestors met and courtship and that kind of thing. Anyway, my book is about my family, my maternal ancestors who were enslaved by Cherokee Indians. Yep, I said that. My Black ancestors were enslaved by Cherokee Indians in Georgia and later in Indian Territory / Oklahoma. It also does document something that was clear in family history and actually accurate, that I also do have blood Cherokee ancestry. And it comes from the line of my family that family oral history always said it did, but I pinned it down both with documents and DNA matches. And my book also goes from there to what happened after the Civil War, when, because the Cherokee initially supported the Confederates and had a treaty with the Confederates, a new treaty was written in 1866 that granted the Cherokee freedmen, freed slaves of the Cherokee and free Blacks who lived among the tribes, citizenship in the Cherokee Nation, which after many court battles, I'm proud to say that I actually hold. I have my card. But what I learned, most prominently to me, was the way, particularly the Black men in my family, the strategies they adopted to deal with being enslaved, and a little more clearly with the Jim Crow era. And as a result, I'm a lot less harsh about the coping strategies that people might adopt even today. One example is the husband of my third great grandmother. I found an article written in the Dallas Morning News in the 1870s that sort of talks about good old Uncle Jake came to town the other day and he tells such wonderful stories. Ain't been such Negroes like him since the antebellum period, which really much cast him as an Uncle Tom. But I look at the facts, and here's a man who somehow got white folks to cut him a square deal, and he owned 100+ acres of land. He was a hell of a cotton farmer. He set up a family cemetery and a school next door to his property, land he'd given to his stepdaughter. And when I thought deeper about it, well, this guy basically is doing a coping thing. He's going to town and amusing these white men and saying, give me a good price when I bring my cotton to the mill, and keep the Klan off of me, because he lived in Klan country northwest of Dallas. And let me just, me and my people be. And he was a very empowered, man of self-esteem. So I've become a lot less judgmental about people, that even people who pass, I've seen that in the early 1900s in my family. And I thought hard about the choices those men made when they signed up, for example, as being white in the World War I draft. And the choice they faced was, say you're Black and basically become a laborer in a uniform, or if you want to be a soldier who actually fights, say you're white. And the same, these are relatives, not ancestors actually, who became white after the war and got jobs in the oil fields of Oklahoma and had decent, productive jobs that paid pretty well. And if they said they'd been Black, they'd have been out there in the oil fields cleaning up. So that's the main thing I learned. The Cherokee ancestry, I had known before the Cherokee slavery, not from childhood. And I know Lee said he'd been working on his book for 10 years, and this year makes year 18 for me.
Wow.
I never would imagine when I started.
Right.
And Richard, thanks for having me.
Thank you for that story. That's enlightening. Also, we have Rodney Brooks is with us, and he wrote a piece on the National Geographic about how he traced his ancestry back to Africa. So I want to hear that story, at least a little snippet of it, so you can, and also how you've changed as a result of having done that work.
Well, thanks, Richard. Mine is like Richard said. I wrote a story in National Geographic, and
listening to the other authors, it won't be a book until another 10 years. So maybe maybe 2035. But but you know, my mother's father lived with us for a while, so I knew and I knew about my mother's side of his family. What I did not know was very little about my father's side. My father died at 43 when I was 16, and basically never even talked. You know, I met my grandparents, but you know, a 10-year-old sitting in the room, you don't think to ask your grandparents that kind of questions. So when I started, I started doing the research, and I eventually wound up with a man by the name of John Butler, who was born in Nigeria in 1650, who was enslaved on a plantation here in Maryland, in St. Mary's County, in Leonardville, Maryland. And that is where my grandparents were born. Now, John Butler was enslaved, and he married actually, there was an Irish woman they called Irish Nell. So she married him because she did not want to be married to a slave owner. And even knowing that if a white woman marries a slave, that she became a slave and all their children became slaves. Now, um, several of their descendants actually sued, went to court and sued over that, and they actually won and actually were relieved of slavery. So there was so much history and so much history here in the state of Maryland, in St. Mary's County, Maryland, which is about two hour and a half from where I live, that I had no idea. Now, jumping a couple of generations ahead, there were documents. My great great grandfather in 1870 purchased 35 acres of land from the white former slave owner, and um, you know, and basically, I actually found the contract, and it's with the signatures and the details. They were going to pay 100. They had to pay 100. Him and his brother. They lived on the land together. Had to pay $100 a year, or if they didn't keep up with the payments, um, they would lose the land. Well, they kept up the payments and bought an additional 40 acres of land 5 years later. So, you know, looking at my biggest fear was I was going to research and I was going to find out that that land was lost or stolen. But my research discovered that that land was actually stayed in the family until 1958, when it was sold by one of the Brooks relatives. But you know, I found, you know, I actually went to, there's a black cemetery that I never heard of in St. Mary's County, where I actually went to look for the grave of my great grandfather, David Brooks. I never found it. The cemetery. The cemetery was not kept up. Gravestones were crumbling. Some of them were gone, but and it was pretty, and it was a hot day. uh, but um, but you know, just to sort of walk the grounds where I knew my great grandfather was buried um, was, you know, it just felt you know, this great feeling to know that you know, my ancestors were there, even though I could not. And I still hope I would go there and find his gravestone. So, but that's, you know, that's my story in a nutshell. You know,
well, in a nutshell, though, how has your outlook on things changed?
well, the it's basically the, you know, because you know, the other authors who talked, you know, they're talking about this, you know, their, you know, enslavement in the South, or the Deep South. This was Maryland, and no, Maryland was part of the South, but to realize that my ancestors were enslaved, you know, within a commuting distance of where I live now, and that they owned this land. And actually, I can trace the boundaries of this land uh, up until 1958, and then when they started moving to Baltimore. So my history stopped with my family in Baltimore. Um, where my grandfather, where my parent, both my parents, actually my mother was from North Carolina, but my father was born in Baltimore. So it basically caused me to do more research into the slavery in the state of Maryland and in DC as well.
Okay. I've forgotten who, well, somebody has done a history of the Eastern Shore, including slavery. I can't remember who it was, though, but it'll come to me. I see Roger Witherspoon has his hand up.
Hi, how are you, and how is everybody? My in my family, the grandfather had an obligation to tell stories, and every Thanksgiving or Christmas, we gather around, and he very demonstrative and tell stories about how the family got through the slave period and its aftermath. In the eastern part of Virginia, you had some, quote, liberals for that time who didn't believe in breaking up families and selling, you know, the offspring south. And as long as you didn't act violently, your family stayed together. And so if a guy from the Randolph family, which is where my great-grandfather was, wanted to marry someone from the Tony plantation, he went to the master, and the masters got together and arranged a swap. This female would go there, and another female would go back. And so within these 4 plantations, you had family units, and that's how we knew who we were. One of the things that characterized what had originally been Walker Elliott Randolph family was that we're hard-headed and don't take shit. And so in 1856, there was an itinerant foreman, and he hit my great-grandfather with his whip. And Walker was a blacksmith, a farrier, and so he had these metal mallets. And he hit the overseer in the head, and the head lost out. He then took his horse and rode north and joined the Pennsylvania Cavalry. And I contacted the Pennsylvania Historical Society, so I have his war records and his mustering out records. But the way Grandpop used to tell us stories, Grandpop would read all of the background of a given battle, in particular Gettysburg. And so he could describe what kind of frogs were hopping around at the time and what was happening in different seasons. And he would weave his grandfather through it. And so it wasn't until high school I finally accepted the notion that perhaps Lincoln freed more slaves than my great-grandfather did, perhaps. But he mustered out at Appomattox. He was in the skirmishes around there, and I have his mustering out papers there. He went back and reclaimed his family, built a forge. He dumped the slave name Randolph and adopted the last name Smith. So it was Walker Elliott Smith. And if any of you are boxing fans, you could look up that name. And in 1876, the U.S. Supreme Court passed the Cruikshank decision, Cruikshank v. U.S. And that decision was that whites had a right to band together, ignore due process, and kill blacks. And that launched the Ku Klux Klan on a 70-year murder spree. And they started rioting and going after independent businessmen, educators, and former black soldiers. And so one Sunday, 6 of them rode up with their Klan outfits, and Walker went to the door to tell them to wait for him at the forge, and he'd be right out. Instead, they barged in and blew him away at the dining room table. The youngest son, Dabney, was 2 at the time. He'd go to his grave with buckshot in his leg. And then they rode off. But he was, it was a blacksmith family. So they could tell from the horses and tracks of the horseshoes exactly who these 6 guys were. So after they buried Walker, the oldest son, the following week, took a rifle and a pistol and went to the general store. He saw two of the horses out front, went inside and killed 9 and shot 3 more before he got taken out. The second son worked in lumber mill, and he swung a double-bladed axe all day long, and he knew his boss was one of them. And he waited, and his boss was going hunting one day and was waiting for 2 friends to show up. When they showed up, he went out, swung the axe, killed all 3 of them, took the horse and rode west. And the family never saw him again and assumed that somewhere along the line a posse had gotten him. However, my mother was born in 1924. And as it turns out, that son made his way to Michigan and had a son, and in 1923 had a grandson named Walker Elliott Smith after his grandfather. And because of the Depression, they wound up in the 30s moving to New York, where he wound up chaperoning my mother and her sister to dancers and chaperoning them. Somebody messed with them, they would tell Walker, and Walker would make them behave. He then dropped.
Roger, let me interrupt you now because we want to keep everybody to 3 minutes max.
All right, then one part of that is he became a boxer after high school, professional, and he changed his name to Sugar Ray Robinson.
All right, you're here. Okay, I see somebody else's hand up. I can't. It was, and then it wasn't. In any case, I see Olivia Bundles there, and I want to give her a chance to plug her book, as well as to tell us. I don't think you went back as far as slavery, but surely.
No, Richard, I went back way farther than slavery.
Is that right? Well, speak up. Tell us. How is your life?
Yes, this is my new book, Joy Goddess, about my great-grandmother, Alelia Walker, and the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker. But Richard, I've actually done research on other branches of my family. So in their case, Madam Walker was born on the same plantation where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved, and she was the first child born free. That was in Louisiana. But I've done lots of research on other ancestors. So one of my grandmothers is descended from free people of color who were in North Carolina in the 1700s, and has 2 great-something grandfathers who were in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War at Valley Forge. And then after the slave uprisings in North Carolina, they migrated from North Carolina to Indiana in the 1830s and created some of the Black settlements that were in Indiana, before the end of slavery. And then other family members who were free people of color escaped in Ohio, who then went to Memphis, and then a great-grandfather who was in the state legislature and superintendent of prisons in Arkansas during Reconstruction, and then sent his children to Oberlin. So I'm just really fascinated in listening to everybody else's story. It's a really wonderful journey when the ancestors, as others have said, talk to you and insist that you pay attention to them. And we obviously have these great stories that need to be told, especially in this moment when our history is being erased.
Exactly. But let me ask you the same question as everybody else, and that is, how has all this shaped your outlook on things and on life?
And I'm sorry, the phone is ringing. I think this is like one more ring. So how has it changed? You know what? It just makes me want to fight more and insist that our stories be told. When I was in high school in the late 60s, my high school history textbook said that slaves, not enslaved people, were contented That was actual word that was used. And better off than free people because they were clothed and fed. And that was the language that was used by the Dunning School and that was pushed by the Daughters of the Confederacy, United Daughters of the Confederacy. And that's the same mindset that we are confronting right now when people want to sanitize history. Well, it was a textbook in Indiana, but the textbooks then as now are, were sort of nationally distributed.
Right, but I mean, the teachers bought into that is what I'm asking.
Well, the teachers didn't know one way or the other. I mean, I went to a predominantly white school, and when I went to summer school one summer in Pine Bluff, and there was some Black history, but I think probably most of us did not in the late 1960s get Black history. The teachers were teaching, that was the conventional wisdom that Reconstruction was a bad thing, that Black people were incompetent, but that was the William Dunning was the historian who was the sort of the perpetrator of that. But also it was the United Daughters of the Confederacy who were infusing themselves into the curriculum. So it wasn't just in Southern schools, it was just, that's the way American history was taught. And in the last 50 years, because of Black history and women's history and the universities, sort of broadening what a dissertation could be. I mean, just not to go into too many rabbit holes, but, before 1970, 75, if you were a scholar doing a PhD history program, the history department would tell you these topics that everybody has been talking about today were not worthy. And that began to change in the 70s with women's history departments, Black history departments, ethnic studies. And so now we have, literally thousands of books, people like Nell Irvin Painter and, all the other names Well, that scholarship has happened in the last 5 decades. And the backlash to that increased knowledge is what we're seeing now. But you cannot put that back in the bottle, but they would like to put it back in the bottle.
Heard that. All right, thank you. Enlightening. Bobbi Bowman has got her hand up. Bobbi, are you ready?
I just wanted to add to a little bit to what Aaliyah was saying. She is absolutely right. The Dunning School was named for the man who was the head of the history department at Columbia University. He was a Southerner, and he had been raised by a mother who owned slaves. And so when he became the head of the history department at Columbia, as we know, the North won the war, the South won the peace. And as the head of the history department at Columbia University, he trained a lot of historians in the Southern version of slavery. It wasn't that bad. We took these uncivilized people. I mean, all the myths that some of us learned in school. The only person who was sort of writing at that time that isn't right is that great Black historian, John Hope Franklin.
Yes.
And then because of the civil rights movement, people started, Black people knew those stories weren't true. And as a result of the civil rights movement, and frankly, to some extent, the GI Bill, Black people were able to go to school and get the credentials that they needed to start then telling the right story of slavery. And white historians, did a lot of this too. They looked at the economics of slavery and proved that the wealth of white people was in our ancestors. It wasn't in their land. It wasn't in their houses. It was in the people that they owned. And that's the other thing I wanted to bring up was what Lee said. Between 1820 and 1860, Black people in the South picking cotton were the foundation of this entire world's economy, because that cotton went to England. England, made it into clothes that they then sent to their empire. The reason India grows cotton today is because of the blockade in the Civil War. The English factories could not get the cotton they needed. They had to find someplace else to raise cotton. They started in Egypt. They've always raised cotton in Egypt. It wasn't the right kind. They finally found that they could raise the cotton they needed in India. Now, let me just speak as a graduate student in history here. There is this book.
Oh, yes.
That explains this story in plain English. This is not some boring history book. I've read lots of those.
Yeah, who's the author of that? I can't remember now.
It's the last name is Baptist, but I highly recommend it. It's very human, but it tells this overall story of how Black people in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana were the foundation of the world economy from 1820 to the Civil War.
Okay, thank you. This is an enlightening discussion. All right, anyone else have any questions for the panelists or want to add something else? Like Athalia. Athalia Knight, are you there?
I am, Richard.
All right.
This has been interesting. I'm impressed by the authors, and I think it's great that people are working on books about this. I come at it in a different sort of way. My family has been having family reunions since 1981, every 3 years. And at those reunions, we try to talk about our history and the legacy that my family has. And what's happening, what's impressive right now is that I haven't been able to, I can only go back, this is on my father's side of the family, I go back to the slave owner, but I can't go any further than a slave owner. That's the history we know so far right now. But as I was sort of saying at these family reunions, we would talk about our history and impart that to the next generation. And I'm happy to report that our last reunion was scheduled for 2020, then the pandemic happened, and then 2023 came around, and I was just too old to sort of coordinate this thing. And the next generation has actually picked up, and we're having a family reunion in August. Here in Oxon Hill, we used to have it in Portsmouth, and then in Sunbury, North Carolina, which is where my family was from. But I'm delighted that my family, the next generation, is picking it up and have become more and more interested in the family and the family history to impart that to their children. So that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, I see Barbara Cochran has arrived. Hi, Barbara. How are you? Welcome, welcome. I wanted you and John to tell us a little about this, the Fallen Journalists Memorial that you all are planning, and why we should get involved, or at least be aware of what's going on with that. So can you and John just spend a few minutes telling us about that?
Be delighted. John, I think, is going to start us off.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. And then love the conversation that's going on so far. And Barbara, good to see you. Hey, just want to talk for a minute, Richard, about how I got involved in this effort and why I think it's important. Many years ago, I was invited to a conference in Morocco. And when I got there, I got word that former Congressman Robert Dreyfuss was at the conference, and he wanted to see me. Couldn't understand why. I didn't have a tremendous amount in common with Bob. I'd never met him before. But we eventually met for breakfast, at which point he told me about this idea that he had of building a memorial in Washington to fallen journalists. It wasn't long after I met him, long before I met him, that the Capital Gazette journalists were killed. 5 employees at the newspaper were killed and 2 injured. And after listening, and that indeed is what spurred Robert on. After listening to him, I thought this was a huge task, but it seemed like something that I would be happy to get involved with. So I suggested that, I told that I would be happy to help. The part of it, though, that I think that I told him I can help him with is to make sure that journalists of color were included when the monument was being built, as well as in the presentation of the stories of the tributes to the fallen journalists that followed. So as a result, I've been very much involved in working with Barbara and others to get the National Association of Black Journalists, NAHJ, and others engaged in this effort. In fact, the AAJA will be approving a resolution in support of the monument at any day now. So I've been doing that piece of it, and to some extent, as Ambassador Young told us last month, Richard, you can't do everything, just do what you can. And that's what I've been doing. And I've been really happy and pleased to work with Barbara on this. Now, Barbara has the bigger picture as the president of this effort. And Barbara, I invite you now to sort of talk about the big picture and the significance of this fallen journalist monument that's being.
Yeah, thank you. And, John and Richard, I really appreciate the invitation to be here. And it was nice to see so many familiar faces, including some good friends that I haven't seen for a while. So I'm very happy to be with all of you. And I'm sorry we had a little family emergency that I had to take care of, and that delayed my getting here in time for the start of the meeting today. And I also want to say that was great for me because I got to hear a lot of this conversation that preceded us, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's wonderful the work that so many of you were doing to do that research and tell those important stories. As John mentioned, this is an effort that was inspired by the attack on the newsroom of the Capital Gazette in Annapolis, which happened 7 years ago this month. And it so happens, since we're talking about history, this was the deadliest attack on journalists in American history. 5 people were gunned down by someone who was a disgruntled reader. And they were people who were simply working in the newsroom, serving their community. Many of them had been part of the community for many, many years, and they were just gunned down in cold blood. David Dreyer, the former congressman from Los Angeles, California, a Republican, had retired from Congress, and he was at that time the chairman of the Tribune Publishing Company, which owned the Capital Gazette. And he decided, as he told John and got him on board and talked to me and got me on board, that something needed to be done about this, because we had just gotten word that the museum here in Washington was going to be closing its doors. It had financial problems, and they simply weren't going to be able to sustain the museum that was all about the First Amendment and the history of journalism any longer. And that museum, which I'm sure almost all of you have visited, included a journalist memorial, which had the names, and there was a ceremony every year when more names would be added to the memorial, and it was a very moving part of the museum. But if you wanted to see it, you had to buy a ticket for, I think it was more than $20 to get in. And so it wasn't really a public memorial. And with the announcement that that was closing, this terrible thing that had just happened in Annapolis, David was motivated. And because he was a former member of Congress, he felt that it should be a public memorial on public land in Washington. He went to the Annenberg Foundation for support, and that was how I got involved. The executive director of the Annenberg Foundation knew me and thought that talked to me about it. And I was just getting ready to retire from the Missouri School of Journalism, where I'd been teaching for the past 9 years. And how could you say no to a project like this? So I've been working on this for the last 6 years, along with John and some of our other members of our board of advisors and so on. And in that time, we have been following what's called the Commemorative Works Act, which is a law that spells out 24 steps that you have to go through from the time that you get the idea for a memorial to the time that you do the ribbon cutting. And I'm happy to tell you that after 6 years, we are now on step 18. So we've come a long way. The first thing that we did was to get authorization from Congress for our foundation to build what we call the Fallen Journalist Memorial. And that law was passed and signed into law by President Trump on December 23rd of 2020. So it was one of the last things he did in his first term as president. We had bipartisan support, unanimous support from both houses of Congress and his signature. So we were able to say from the very beginning that this is not a partisan effort, and to try to say that this is something for all Americans. So from that authorization, we then proceeded to securing a site, and I'm very happy to be able to tell you that the site is a very prominent location. It's at 3rd and Independence Avenue Southwest. I love the idea that we're on Independence Avenue. I think that's very fitting for a journalist memorial. And we're across the street from the National Museum of the American Indians, and on the opposite side of the street is the Voice of America. So it's a very meaningful location. And the thing that we really loved about it is because it's 3 blocks from the Capitol, we have a direct view of the Capitol dome, so that whatever design we were able to come up with would be something that would link our site to one of the most important symbols of democracy. So we got that site approved. That took another act of Congress and another presidential signature, this time from President Biden. And then from there, we were able to go on and to do a search for...
I'm letting Nessa just walk around. Okay. Don't let her go in that room.
He was able to, we were able to get the site secured and to find the architect. We did an international search and came up with an architect from Chicago named John Ronan, who has designed a beautiful, very unusual glass monument, glass representing transparency and clarity that we all hope for in journalism. And if we can make it work, Richard, I'd like to show everyone the video that we have of the memorial walkthrough. Do I need to be made a host in order to share that video with you?
Well, I'll let Jackie Green answer that question. He's the producer.
Okay.
You can share. I just gave you authority to share. You can share it.
Okay. And do I have to click something to be able to do that? I probably do. I don't see the share.
At the bottom of the screen, it's the little green button down there.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. So now I'm going to go, I'm a novice at this, so let's hope this works right. I'm going to go here. Why is this not working? Now it's working. Okay. So I will try to go full screen with this. I've got the audio up. I'm going to do closed captioning so you can hear this. And can I go? I'd like to go to full screen, but I'm not seeing the button to do that.
The lower right-hand corner of your picture. Right there. There you go. Click on that.
Excellent.
The Fallen Journalist Memorial design engages with themes of transparency and light, issues important to the work of journalists and photojournalists. Solid glass elements are stacked horizontally to represent the fallen. Visitors investigate through their own journey of discovery. The layered assemblage of transparent elements appears different from all 3 sides of the triangular site, like the multiple sides of a news story. Visitors will experience on-site and digital content that will illustrate journalists' roles in witnessing, recording, and documenting historic events. They can trace multiple paths which lead to a circular space at the heart of the memorial. Like a journalist works to filter out the distracting noise of false information, the transparent walls of the space block out the noise of the surrounding urban environment to create a place of quiet contemplation to properly honor the sacrifice of those remembered here. At the center of the space is a circular polished lens in the ground bearing the text of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Looking downward to read its message, the visitor's own reflection will gaze back, implying that each one of us has a role to play in protecting First Amendment freedoms. At night, a soft glow emanates from the uplit glass elements, with a brightly lit Capitol dome visible above the memorial's eastern rim, signifying the watchdog role the journalists play in a democracy.
Hey, my name's Alexis. I'm Caitlin.
My name is Emmanuel, and I live in DC.
And you can find me.
Trying to stop sharing. Yes, I think I've done that. Great. Okay.
Great, thank you. I've got a question about. Let's see if I can find it here. About your contacts with the various journalists of color organizations, and what you would like them to do and how they can help. One of the reasons I ask is because I wrote about journalists of color who covered World War II, and I got an interesting answer from a Native journalist who said that there weren't any Native journalists at that time because they weren't being educated. I'm trying to find the exact quote, but so that therefore you hear about the code talkers and all that, but you don't hear about any Native journalists as war correspondents. So how successful have you been at getting that kind of diversity into this project?
Well, we have, with John's help, we have been endorsed by the National Association of Black Journalists, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and the Asian American, I'm sorry, the National Association of I'm now
indigenous.
I was thinking it's NAJA. Where am I going here?
IJA now.
Association.
Yeah.
Yes, and we're hoping to get an endorsement very soon from the Asian American Journalists Association.
Yeah, but aside from an endorsement, that's very easy for people to do.
Right.
Okay, I endorse you. All right, now go on your way.
Right.
What are they actually doing?
Well, we hope that we'll be doing more. We're our focus has been on getting the approvals that we need, getting through the regulatory process to get the physical memorial built. But last year we asked Irving Washington and a colleague to do a strategic plan for us, really, or a plan for a plan to help us decide what our programming would be. Because once the memorial is built, we turn it over to the National Park Service, and they will run the memorial from then on. But we want to continue as a foundation so that we can provide educational materials and all kinds of resources that will illuminate the lives of the journalists who lost their lives and explain why freedom of the press is important. And so we're just starting on that work now. So we haven't really reached out for all the scholarly essays and content that we're hoping to get. We're just in the process now of hiring a consultant to help us come up with an editorial plan for that. And that'll be presented in several ways. We'll have a website that will be organized so that people will be able to research all kinds of topics, including how journalists of color have what they've contributed and how they are remembered at this memorial. And we're also going to have interactive media through augmented reality at the site so that people will be able to pull up stories and go in depth as much as we want. And in fact, in the demo that we have, one of the people that we talk that we use as an example is Chauncey Bailey. And so that's where we are now on that. And so any kind of research that anybody has, we would welcome to have people approach us with that and to tell us about it. And one thing I want to make clear is there will be no names on this memorial, unlike the memorial at the museum where they added names every year. We'll have no names, and that's because the Park Service won't permit a memorial that you would have to add to year after year after year because of the expense and because of what it does to the design concept. And so all the names, all of the individual stories are going to have to be told through the website, through the augmented reality, and through programs that we would do. I mean, we expect to have an annual event that will honor people. But in terms of telling the stories, our idea right now is to do it through themes. And so you obviously have journalists who encounter danger covering wars, journalists covering corruption, journalists covering authoritarian governments. But we also want to have journalists who are advocating in behalf of expanding rights. And that is the place where we would tell the story of journalists who reported on the civil rights movement in this country and talk about the journalists who were involved in that, including E. Lee, is it Giles, who was very badly beaten while covering the integration of the school in Little Rock. And so those are the kinds of things that we're going to incorporate into the stories that we tell.
And if I may add for a second, Barbara, and that where the journalists of color come in is that through their endorsement, Richard, it means now that they will be cooperating with us in providing information when we start talking about getting documentation from the various organizations about their members who were involved in coverage of some of these thematic areas that Barbara was just talking about, as well as, sadly, some of our members who were killed in the line of duty. So as part of that support, they will be working with us to provide that information that ultimately we'll be passing on to the public.
Okay, I wanted to just say that not everybody, not all journalists who died being journalists were in such dramatic circumstances, like war, for example. Here in D.C., Maurice Williams was killed at the district building because he was involved. He was there while there was an attempted takeover of the district building. And I think there was another one in California, another Black journalist who was on his way to a story when he was run over by a car or hit a train or something like that. Let me just, for the record, just say what this Native journalist told me. This is James Gallego Davies. Some might know his father, Tim Gallego, who was the editor of the Native Sun today in Rapid City, South Dakota. There were very few educated or professional natives 80 years ago. There's no way a local paper would have hired a native for any writing position. And this held true well into the 1970s. Even today, the last native columnist that the Rapid City Journal had was white, despite the fact that there were native columnists they could have hired, columnists that beat out the man they did hire for best column on a routine basis. So I guess we won't be seeing very, very many native people in that memorial, at least who are in the mainstream media. So I just wanted to just put that on the record. Okay, well, thank you all very much. This is elucidating. And where can they get more information?
Our website is at fallenjournalist.org. I'll just shamelessly say that all of the money for this will be raised from private sources. So if you're so moved, we have a donate button, and we'd certainly appreciate any support that we get.
Thank you. And you reminded me that I forgot to mention Journal-isms' own fundraiser, which is coming up on June 21st. Another shameless plug here, but we do need the money and then the support. So you should see a notice on our website about it. And if you don't, just ask me. June 21st, thanks to the generosity of Jube Shiver, who's going to have us at outdoors at his Virginia home, and we're going to have the group Sweet Honey and the Rock being interviewed since they're celebrating their 50th anniversary, and they all started out here in DC. So just keep that in the back of your head, and if you're so moved, come on by. All right. Earlier we had Lerma Rackley had her hand up. I wonder if Lerma still wants to say anything. Lerma, are you there? Oh, she got tired of waiting?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, you are here.
Yeah, I got thrown off. I lost my internet connection for a minute there.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So I lost some of what was being said. But I think the time has really passed for me to go into the project I was working on. But I want to say hi to I'm doing one of the ancestor projects as well. And I can just throw in a little teeny plug.
Okay.
One of the things I found out about was that my great-great-grandfather was the younger brother of Mary McLeod Bethune's grandmother. So they were close cousins. So I am going around claiming that I'm Mary McLeod Bethune's cousin, for anybody who knows how important that is. But I also wanted to throw in that the experience that I had in school, going to segregated schools in the South, was not the same one that people had going to schools in the North, because our teachers taught us everything possible that would instill Black pride. They taught us about all the writers. They taught us about all the slavery stuff that we needed to know. They taught us all the hymns and spirituals, and we had so much information coming. So while the schools should not have been segregated, that was an advantage of growing up in the South, especially if you were on a campus like Claflin that was educating people right out of slavery. I mean, right as soon as all the HBCUs got established, they all had elementary schools and normal schools, and there was a different level of education about things that would instill Black pride. And we found out about our ancestors and other people's ancestors, and it was just an entirely different experience. And I would like to share that through the story that I'm going to write, which will be a memoir of my version of my mother's life, her life as she told it to me, which goes back into as far as the 1600s. She can trace her ancestry.
Right, very good, thank you. I see that Angela Dodson has her hand up as well.
Yes, some of you have already heard part of this on an earlier journalisms, or I've talked to you privately, so I'm going to try to tell the short version. Is that some of you may know I come from a family that was owned by and probably descended from the largest slaveholding family in America, the Hairstons, which Henry Winsick wrote a book about 20-some years ago, and I interviewed him then. This family has a history of holding a reunion together for the last 60 years, the white side and the Black side. So I had never been to that reunion. I grew up in a large portion of the family where we had our own reunions, but about the year before COVID, I went to the reunion, and before that, I had befriended a white woman who, one of the white Hairstons who participates in a lot of our Facebook conversations. The Hairstons also have like a half a dozen Facebook pages. So I met her, and shortly after that, she wrote a blog about her feelings about being in this family. And partly because they created an accidental genealogy, because they wrote down every Black baby that was born and how they had to, give them a blanket and whatever. And when you the records are in large ledger books at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And when you look at them, there are whole groupings of families, because they would record the mother, the father, and what they gave the baby. So she went to look at them, and what she wrote about was how repulsed she was at looking at the records. And she wrote this in a blog, and I called her up one day or messaged her or whatever I did and said, "Are you going to write about this?" And she said, "Well, people keep telling me I should, but I'm not really a writer." She was in PR and advertising for years. And I said to her, well, I am a writer and I do ghostwriting, and maybe there's something we can do together. So about 2 years ago, we started having conversations and I recorded her, and she had a very focused idea of what she would write about if she could write. And it was her 9 epiphanies about race in America after she saw these records. And it's things like lynching and Reconstruction and Emmett Till and various other things that some of us may think we know about, but I've learned so much from these conversations because then I go back and research whatever we said. And we set up a Zoom. We'd say, oh, we're only going to talk about Reconstruction today. And of course, we weave back and forth between all these other subjects that we've talked about. Remember what I said about whatever. So we're at the point where we have actually finished the manuscript, but we never did a book proposal because I wanted to make sure that we could really tell the story and that I could work with her. And she didn't say anything that really offended me or triggered me in such a way I couldn't write about it anymore. And as it turns out, we've gotten through this whole process. We've gotten along. Actually, our personalities are a lot alike, et cetera. So now we have to go back and finish the proposal part. And we've worked through some of that, but I'm tied up on another project I have a contract on. And, I don't really have a deadline or a contract for the other project, but we still hope to finish soon and maybe be out next year or so. So that's what I'm working on.
Okay, very good. I want to take this back to the media that we all are a part of. How can all this information that we're gathering make for a better media that we're all reading, especially in this age, as people have pointed out, when there's this effort at erasure? How can we turn this into something positive for the general public and the people who read and watch and listen to us? Who wants to talk about that?
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Just briefly, and it's been such a rich discussion, and seeing that we're all having this collective experience. When the new Pope Leo, was announced, I loved that somebody went to Ancestry simply hearing his last name, and being from the South Side of Chicago, I was like, yeah, that could be my uncle, Uncle Bob or something, right? Uncle Bob or something like that. I love that, and that kind of depth, the genealogical, that's what's possible now when you're getting at the subterranean aspect of some of these stories. I don't, and that came out very, very quickly, simply somebody going to Ancestry.
As a matter of fact, you remind me that it was a prize-winning work last year, 40 Acres and a Lie, I think it was called, done by Reveal and the Center for Public Integrity. And it was made possible by the reopening of a lot of the records from the Freedmen's Bureau, I believe. And they were able to find out that there were a lot of promises that were made at that time that were not kept to the newly freed enslaved people. And that made for a good media story, and as turned out, a prize-winning media story. So there are ways to work this information into the consciousness of our readers and listeners and viewers. Anybody else have anything to say about that?
Well, I think,
go ahead.
Richard, if I could just jump in, I think one of the things that we're discovering is that we have so many different media available to us, so many formats that we can pursue. At the risk of sounding self-serving, writing a novel against an historically accurate backdrop is one way of telling the story, which is the route that I took. But then there's the work that's being done by the other authors who were on the panel tonight, as well as all of the other participants in the Roundtable who are working on projects, all of which can find their way into different kinds of media. Fragmented audiences are just simply a fact of life today. And I think the best thing that we can do is to tell all of our stories using all of the media that are available to us. And that, I think, is where we have to go at this point.
You're here. Okay, Bobbi Bowman has her hand up. Oh, unmute, please. Unmute. Unmute.
There you go.
Okay.
The other thing I would suggest is that reporters need to be more historians. I love Peter Baker of the New York Times, because whenever Peter writes a story, he doesn't talk about what's happening now, but he talks about the context for it. And the context is always the history of what came before. My biggest regret when I was a reporter was that I thought what I was reporting on was just what happened that day, what happened that night. I wish now I had gone back and looked at more history. Everything has a history. Every issue that we cover, every person that we look at has a history. And it's, frankly, as the gentleman was just saying, it's pretty easy to get at that history now. If we just drop in a few paragraphs of history and what came before, we can do a lot of it. And Peter Baker is a marvel at that.
Very good. Okay. Keith has his hand up.
Yeah. So
good to see you.
Good to see you too, Richard. My book about my family ancestry going back to enslavement 200 years just came out in April. Oh. I mean, for me, I think.
What's the name of the book? Come on,
so it's called Descended: Searching for My Gullah Geechee Roots, and it's about my ancestry in Hilton Head, going back from cotton plantations, going forward to the fishing and farming community that formed after the Civil War. It's where my grandmother was from. I just didn't know a lot about it until I embarked on this research. I would just hear stories from my grandmother, but part of it was like understanding the Gullah Geechee identity. For me, it was kind of so fulfilling, right, to kind of fill this void with information, but also the way folks on these islands actually chose, and this is something identified in the book, they chose to live separately, and they rejected integration as a model of living. And they did everything for themselves. So they fished, they farmed, they built their homes, their praise houses and churches, midwives, delivered the babies. They had root doctors to heal people. And I think about just how inspiring and redeeming that information is. So for me, like, one thing is about how do we get it in the media, but how do we get this information to Black folks so we kind of change that dynamic of like erasure and also shame that people feel. Like, how did all of our ancestors overcome? And I heard a lot of those stories tonight. How did we overcome? What did we do for ourselves? Like, what are the things that we can learn from the past? And so I'm really interested in trying to get that to our people, because it's important to like combat erasure and deal with the historical record and bring this stuff forward for everyone. But it's particularly important for me. So that was something that your question provoked for me.
You're here. Okay, Ken Cooper.
Yeah, I want to second Charles Fancher's comment about using all media available on all the platforms. I think, African-American journalists, actually all African-American creatives, on whatever medium and platform they use, ought to be telling the human story of slavery, enslavement, and also Jim Crow, and connect that to the condition of Black people today. And I think Lee's book does that in a very powerful kind of way. And I think that could help change public opinion about things like reparations, or even the teaching of our history. Doesn't mean that each book has to conceive for that, but I conceive with that purpose in mind. But I think that's a potential impact. And when I think about it, in some ways, we African Americans have hurt our own cause by being so long, so ashamed about ancestors being enslaved that not only would we not write about it, we wouldn't even talk about it. And I'm glad to see that change. And I was really thrilled to hear of the concept of this roundtable when I got Richard's note about it, because I wasn't aware of other people's efforts, except for Charles's. Charles, we have a mutual friend, Maida Odom, who knew what I was doing, and she told me about your book.
Yeah.
So I just say more. about slavery and its human impact, and more about Jim Crow in every medium and platform available to us by all manner of creatives, not just writers, but painters, artists, performing artists, everybody. I mean, even, Billie Holiday's song from way back when about strange fruit, southern trees bear strange fruit. I mean, that was a powerful message for its time, even today. And I think we just need more and more of that. And I encourage everybody who's working on something to publish. One last note about my book, the title will change from my recent discussion with my editor, and it's due out sometime in early 27.
Right, very good. Let me also just throw in here that I went to Lerma, and I were among those, and Athalia at Kenny Walker's memorial service at Catholic University about a week and a half ago. And I wrote in the journalism that was just posted about one aspect of that I found revealing. And that was that Kenny's story was part of DC's story. After the riots in 1968, the colleges in Washington realized, the majority colleges, Georgetown, George Washington, Catholic and American, realized how estranged they were from the Black community in Washington, D.C. So they offered free scholarships, the 4-year scholarships, to 30 students in D.C. high schools. And Kenny Walker was one of them. Now, by the time they got to Kenny, the money had run out. And so this was a project of not only Catholic University, where he ended up, but also the Evening Star newspaper, and I think the Marriott Corporation. And so they told Kenny, why don't you go down to the Evening Star and ask the publisher to give you a 4-year scholarship? So Kenny said he was too naive to realize how ridiculous that idea that was, but actually it worked. And the Evening Star paid for Kenny Walker to go to school. And the president of the university, Catholic University, talked about what a change in the school took place because of the fact that these Black students were now part of the undergraduate pool. So I raised that to say that we have histories right in our own backyards that we don't even know about. And I've lived in DC for on and off 50 years. I never heard about this. And Kenny also told us that the other schools did the same thing, although they didn't preserve it the way Catholic did, by having a film made on one of the anniversaries, having regular reunions, and now a scholarship program built on that. One of the people in the program was homeless, and today he's in law school. And, I mean, so anytime somebody talks about, as we have in the White House, that DEI is, a bad thing and doesn't do anything, we should judge people solely on the merits, blah, blah, blah. More of the public needs to know about stories like this, about the benefits. In fact, the other thing I'll mention about that is Mark Morial of the Urban League has a coalition of organizations like the Legal Defense Fund, the women's organizations, Latinos, et cetera, who are fighting to preserve diversity. And one of his complaints is that we don't hear enough about the companies that are on the right side of history and resisting all of this, such as Harvard, for example, but they're also in private industry. So I say that to say, there's history and genealogy and all that right in our own backyards that our readers, viewers, and listeners don't know about, that we can help them. I see Hazel has her hand up.
Yes, hello everybody. I want to ask, I want to say something, but at first I want to just get this question out on the table. I think it was Bobbi who talked about those 100 acres. I want to know what happened to those 100 acres. But first, let me just say, and maybe if I say this, I will finally get it done. I've been working on my autobiography / memoir within the Black press for years, maybe about a decade. And 2 years from now, the Black press will become 200 years old. And I hope that my book will come out that year. And I hope that my book will include what is possibly my mother's connection. My mother's Marie Jefferson. She's 91 years old. She's sitting in the room next to me. I'm taking care of her. Her connection to the Monticello plantation and Thomas Jefferson's slaves. They were born, her family, all of the Jeffersons were born right at the foot of Monticello, and they are recorded in the Piedmont region, which is where Monticello is. And so I've been trying to do that research, but you know, I get so distracted that I just can't seem to get it done. I just believe that my great-great-great-grandfather William is the same William who was a slave at Monticello. And so I want to include that in my memoir of working in the Black press all of my life, all of my professional life. So Bobbi, what happened to those 100 acres?
Hazel, I'm so glad you asked. We lost the land in 1909 because 1909, at the turn of the century, was when we were really at the bottom of Jim Crow. Things were so bad in this country. 1909 was when the NAACP was formed. It was formed after a terrible riot in Springfield, Illinois. I can't prove this, but I have circumstantial evidence that showed that basically white people came to my grandfather owning 100 acres of land, my great-grandfather. You know, they just walked up to him and said, Philip Williamson, we don't think a Black man should own this amount of land. And he sold it to a white man.
Hello.
That's
everything.
Amazing.
Everything. He sold everything. My grandfather was living with him with a new child and a new wife. So the father, my grandfather's father, gave him none of the land. And that is the major piece of evidence I have that people, threatened him, and therefore the great-grandfather had to move.
Thank you. That's fascinating.
It is. Okay, anybody else?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I found out, and I think others can too, is that during Reconstruction and in the early first 50 years of the last century, there were always Blacks that fought back. There were Blacks that had military service, World War I, World War II, Civil War, who took on the Klan and took on those posses. And if you look for that, you might find some of those stories as well. I mean, I grew up on stories of Blacks fighting back. And so when the 45 Klan and Nazis started building a scaffold in front of the dorm where they publicly said they were going to kill me, me and my roommate, who was a Jew, decided, well, we can either say the odds are 45-2 or 1-on-1 45 times. And we divided them in half and went after them. But anyway, those stories are there if you look for that.
All right. You know, I'll also add that I think it was at the National NAHJ conference where they had someone from the Department of Education speak a couple of years ago, and he talked about a project. I think he was Latino himself, about how the teachers would ask the students to interview their grandparents, and it was a tremendous way of not only learning the family history but in building self-esteem, because a lot of the kids didn't know what their grandparents had gone through, and were proud of that after they had done these interviews. So that's another way that gets into this whole business about learning about your family history, and also has relevance to today, to the way we raise our kids and how they grow up with a sense of themselves. So I'll just throw that out there. Anybody else want to ask a question, particularly of the panelists?
Richard, I want to add on to something you just said, just really quickly. You have to talk to the oldest people in your family, and you have to do that first. The documents will be there. I had I believe four people died during the course of the writing of my book, and one died a month before I got to her, right? And so that, you know, when you're passing that on, you have to start there.
Hear, hear. Okay.
Right.
Leon Dash, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I do. You have to stress the importance of recording those conversations. Go to the reunion with a recorder. Call your relative up and do an oral history. Maybe it's only for the reunion program, but I recently found that an interview I did with a cousin 10 years ago was useful in a book that I'm working on. You have to get it down on paper. Other relatives may not understand the importance of actually recording it. And even if you don't transcribe it till later, you have it. You can call them up and do a Zoom. Get the old lady before she's dead. But do your relatives now. Even if you don't have a use for it at the moment, you don't know where you're going to put it, whether it's going to be useful, find out what they know. To give you an example, I stumbled on a story about a man named Odell Waller just because I was leafing through a Black encyclopedia. My grandmother's maiden name is Waller. This particular relative, all my Wallers claim, is not related to us, but he was also raised by a Hairston woman, which is the other side of my family. And what Odell Waller did was basically went to get his mother's sharecropping share straightened out with the white man who was retaining it, and ended up shooting him on site in broad daylight in front of people. Wow. Somehow he escaped and he got to Columbus, Ohio. But eventually they caught up with him, and his case was taken up by the NAACP and a couple of international labor groups. So, and very few people know about the story. Yeah, I asked a couple of historians, you ever heard about this story? I asked Henry Louis Gates. No, never heard of it. And I happened to interview my cousin initially for a reunion book. And he's about 10 years older than I am. He's a Waller. And I asked him if he heard of this case. He said, oh, yeah. My grandparents on the other side of my family took me to the funeral. And they brought him in, and he had on this ill-fitting suit, and I remember it to this day. And this is like, what, 80 years later, at least. So those stories become important. Somebody in your family has witnessed something. Somebody in your family has seen something. And they have interesting stories to tell. I see Dorothy Davis on here. And about 10 years ago, Dorothy hired me to basically download her mother. And for, I don't know, a year or two, I went to the nursing home up in North Jersey every few Saturdays and interviewed her about her life. And Dorothy's father was a famous photographer. Her mother was basically a housewife, I guess. But we got stories out of her about her family history and about his life, and they lived in Africa. He was a diplomat. So there were stories about how they'd met all these famous people. And we still haven't done anything with the story, but it's all on tape. It's all transcribed.
I have it.
So, you know, those are the kind of things you can do now. Do it before Grandpa's dead. Do it before, you know, I was just talking today about how I'm researching something about, I don't know if anybody knows about this, about the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was a coal mining fight that's still the largest labor violence episode ever in America, and the largest violent episode in America since the Civil War. And none of my people ever talked about it, although it happened maybe a mile from where I lived in junior high, or it began about a mile before I lived in junior high. So, you know, I've been interviewing and trying to talk to some of my friends in West Virginia, particularly old white men, about whether they knew about it, because nobody in my household ever mentioned it. And I was in my late 20s before I ever heard about it. And it happened in 1921. But my parents weren't born till a year later. And all my grandfathers were dead by the time I was born, basically. and one of my grandmothers. I only had one living grandmother most of my life. So I never heard anybody tell these stories. Now I'm trying to figure out, did other people's families tell these stories? My family just never told this story. And it involves something like 10,000 miners facing off 3,000 law enforcement people, and the miners and the government bombed these people. So it seems like somebody would have mentioned, do you know what happened up there on that mountain right outside your house? Nobody did. So, get the stories written.
Did anybody run into people who think that some of this family history should stay private, and they're not going to, that's not for you to know about? Anybody run into that? And if so, how do you deal with that?
I think you run into.
Unmute, please. Unmute.
There we go.
Okay.
You were asking about
people who don't want to, who think that some things should remain secretive.
Well, it's funny. My mother, who was in her 90s when this project started, and she's going to turn 101 next month, was actually the source of a lot of the anecdotes that formed the basis of Red Clay. And she is a notoriously private person. She just, but for some reason on a particular day, I don't know, maybe the stars were aligned in some special fashion, she just started talking. And she started telling me all these stories about her grandfather, my great-grandfather. And taken together, they did not make a complete history, but there were all of these discrete memories that provided a sense of who this man had been, so that as I looked into him from other angles, they provided a thread that I could pull to bring it all together. And so I guess that's kind of a backwards way of coming at your question. It wasn't that she resisted or was unhappy that the stories had been told, but rather I think she was just waiting for the right moment to disgorge them, and followed up that conversation with page after page after page of handwritten anecdotes that she would send to me. And those they really form the core of what became the novel, even though it's a fictionalized account. So family input, really to underscore what Angela was saying, is just so critical. And you have to get it while you can, because those people aren't going to be on the scene forever.
Here, 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 here.
Richard, could I just say this really quickly, that it's so crucial that you do it now. If you're going to talk, Mama now has Alzheimer's dementia. And so Professor Fancher was, talking about his mother, and is like 102. Fortunately, she started talking in her 90s. Mama talked in her 80s, but now she's got Alzheimer's dementia. And there's so much that I wish I had asked her. And so if you're going to talk to them, if you're going to do it now, before anything like that kicks in. Prayerfully, it won't.
You're here. All right, Dorothy Davis.
In about a couple of weeks, there's going to be a reunion of the descendants of the enslaved of the plantation from whence on my father's side came. And they have it every 2 years.
Where's it going to be?
Edenton, North Carolina.
Okay.
The story is that my ancestors were bought in Edenton, and at some point, the couple that owned them decided that they needed to go to Fonsdale, Alabama, because the crop was better, and so they walked. They took everybody and walked from Edenton, North Carolina, to Fonsdale, Alabama. Fonsdale is a little blip of a town because I went there to just see where did we come from in that sense. I'm the family historian on all sides, every side of the family. I have the history, and for some reason, I think that in every family there is someone that's unconsciously designated as the person to carry all the history. Because all of a sudden I started getting things from the elders, and why are they giving this to me? But they would constantly give it to me, and then I've been the keeper, and I've been very consistent about getting the narrative straight and sharing it with my cousins and so forth, so that they have it for their children. In our family, on my dad's side, what we found out was that we are descendants of the Harrison family, William Harrison and Benjamin Harrison. And I use that as a weapon when I need to. I bring that up to change the subject if I get approached about something. I'm not proud of it, but I just use it to just counter the arguments that I get. So it's very important to also not throw out things in the attic when people die, to sort through it, to be sure that there are not any nuggets in there that tell the history. Yeah. So on my dad's side, I mean, in terms of my dad, I was his executor, and I had to go through all his things. I thought it was going to take a year to do all of that, and then it ended up being 2 years, and actually 30 years later, and I'm still finding things out about his life, our family life, the connections to things, and also in terms of making sure the history is correct. I'm really concerned about, we were in the Foreign Service, and my dad's era and before his era, in terms of blacks going into the Foreign Service, is not recorded really. They always start with someone in the 70s, and it's people who started in 1925 with Clifton Wharton Sr., who's the first African American to pass the Foreign Service exam. He was the only black professional in the entire State Department building, and they sent him off to Liberia within 24 hours without getting the orientation that his counterparts got. Things like that we don't interweave. I kind of tracked him down. I tracked down Clifton Wharton Jr. because I was curious as to who was the first African-American Foreign Service child. And it turns out it was him. So I tracked him down and I interviewed him, and I did tape it. And it was, and then I transcribed it, and we were comparing, he at the time he was chair of TIA CREF, and I don't know what stage I was in, but in any case, I went to his office, and we were like two children talking about our experiences and being happy to be able to talk to each other because we didn't have others to talk to about it. But I have it, and yeah, that's it.
Very good. Thank you. Now I see that I tried to get Leon Dash earlier, and also Joel Dreyfuss, whose family histories go beyond the United States. And I wondered whether they have anything to say about what happens then. Everybody, go ahead.
I want to reiterate what Lonnae O'Neill and Angela Dodson said about interviewing elderly relatives. Now, that the documents are always there. I went after the documents first, and relatives I needed to interview had died, unfortunately, in my own research. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Are there anything? Is there anything different about having a family history that goes beyond the United States that you're trying to trace?
Well, some countries, the documentation is better. The French kept very good records.
Say that again.
The French kept very good records.
Okay.
In their colonies. And when Haiti was under French rule, they shipped the copies of the records to France every year, so that stuff that was lost in the war, the Independence War, and fires and earthquakes were preserved in Europe. And I was able to get a lot of information about my family.
The British also are very good record keepers. I went to Barbados to research my family, my father's side of the family, and I was able to trace my family back to 1610.
All right.
Through land records, and including the Humphrey Dash, who was born in 1610 in England and came to Barbados on the colonizing ship in 1627 when he was 17, and didn't go back with the ship. He jumped ship and established himself in Barbados, and I found his will probated in 1669 in the Barbados archives. So from that, I could follow the whole line from Humphrey Dash down to myself, from 1610, and at the time I was doing the research was 1994 to 1998.
Let me ask both of you guys the same question I asked the others, and that is, how has this changed your life knowing all this information?
It made me very introspective, because I've been given a lot of misinformation by family members.
Oh, okay. That's what being a good journalist will do for you.
It was funny because I have two great-great-grandfathers who were born in slavery, and both of them are my great-great-grandfathers because they were the children of, oh no, their two oldest children, a daughter, Lucretia Dash, and Dolly Dash, married, and they were first cousins. So all my life, people were trying to cover that up, that they were not brothers, but they were brothers. They were full brothers. And I sat with elderly family members in Barbados. So that was an interesting thing. So, some of my family didn't appreciate that.
That was what I was talking about before, about some people say that, never you mind.
I think what was most surprising to me was finding Black ancestors who were slave owners as well. And in Haiti, 1/3 of all the slaves were owned by free people of color. So
wow, I didn't know that.
It was a big surprise. Also, another ancestor who migrated from Martinique to Haiti always told a story about how he left Martinique because he was denied a job there because he was Black. And when I dug into his records, family records, I found that they were slave owners too.
So now, how does this affect you today? I mean, knowing all of this.
I think that I'm less judgmental about people who were slave owners because it was the prevailing economic system, and even free Black people who wanted to build wealth resorted to slavery. They didn't know any other way.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Anybody got any final words? We're out of time. But if anybody has a final thought, especially the panelists. Yes.
I want to say something. I feel that you asked about why this was important.
Yes.
That we continue to lean into these stories.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk about Donald Trump and his executive orders and the way that that's affected public radio and public TV. And You know, I feel that even people who were on board during George Floyd, you know, we saw an explosion in opportunities to write about American history and how that connected to George Floyd. And that was, in my view, I now realize it was a trendy time. And the people who describe themselves as allies have thrown in the towel very quickly. As soon as Donald Trump came out with a lot of the different directives, we're seeing it on the lecture circuit. We're seeing that there are, I've even had one company ask if they could see my speech before I spoke. And so what I'm finding is that I don't think the mainstream news outlets or a lot of the nonprofit organizations are as committed to these narratives as we think they are. And I think it's important for us as Black journalists to tell our stories in long form detail. Because even if if people in newsrooms are allowed to tell their story, it's not often with the depth and the complexity and the nuance that it needs to be told. And so I am passionate, if not self-righteous, about making sure that Black journalists, you know, take stories like ours, the one that I told, and other ones, and use them as a model, ask us for help, lean on us for, you know, whatever help you may need. We need to get our stories out there. And yeah, if our Black children do get the stories, but at the same time, not with the level of depth that they should be getting it with. You know, there are a lot of different people that I ran across who waited until they were, you know, very old to start opening up. And I guess Alex Haley said, you know, when an elder dies, it's like a library burned down. And so it's important for us to get these stories because, to be honest with you, I'm seeing it every day because this is what I do. These organizations are not really as invested in stories, particularly about slavery and Jim Crow truth, as they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Yep, not surprised.
I want to say, if you're in DC, I don't know where everybody is, but if you're in DC, I strongly urge you to go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture by June 8th to their exhibit called In Slavery's Wake. No, I forgot the rest of it. But anyway, it's a really in-depth, well thought out exhibit that connects slavery with colonialism, with genocide, and with Jim Crow, not Jim Crow, apartheid. It's their first traveling international exhibit. It's going to go to Rio, and then it's going to go to Cape Town, and then Dakar, and then Liverpool. But it's really, really a really excellent exhibit.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I think we're out of time. I want to thank the panelists, especially, and everybody else who participated. These books will all be on sale at a place near you or online. We're going to print out the transcript, not the transcript, the transcript of the chat room comments for everybody for whom we have an email address. And then everything goes well. This will also be, the recording will also be posted on YouTube in the next couple of days. So thank you all once again. And we'll see some of you, I guess, on the 21st of June. We have our fundraising session. And the rest of you will see the sweet by and by and in July. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your evening.
God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. All right.
Yeah. I'm gonna eat some. I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
All right.
What was that?